Welcome to another episode of Rubicon Unlimited. So if you've been following along, I'm about to get some larger tires. And you know, those things tend to be quite expensive. And winter's coming. I have a bit of a timeline to get these things installed. I don't have the funds right now to do, the lift that I would want, but I have a solution here. I'm gonna go with the Teraflex leveling kit, and that should be plenty to fit the larger tires. I have the Bushwhacker flat fender flare, so that'll help. That paired with some wheel spacers, I should be good. Once funds free up, then I can take a look at some of those better suspension lifts that will do a better job. So today we're gonna go over the install of that Teraflex leveling kit, and it should give me about an inch and a half, depending on how much sag my suspension's already kind of dealing with. I've got a winch installed, and the Mopar hard rock bumpers, so those are a little heavier. But anyways, we're gonna go through the install, and stay tuned with me because I'm gonna be breaking this up. The wheel spacers will probably go on in the next video, and then you'll see some larger tires on here. So let's take a look at the kit and then do the install. Sound good? Cool. So this Teraflex leveling kit states that you will get roughly 2 inches in the front and about an inch in the back. And what that'll do is actually level out the factory rake. So you'll get a much more level suspension ride. And what I'm gonna do is actually measure the current stock suspension and just do a comparison for when we're done this install. That's about 39.5 inches to the top of my fender flare. And in the rear, we're at 41 inches. So when all is said and done, we'll remeasure and just see how much lift we actually got, because I've got a winch in the front and other stuff that will cause the suspension to sag. So we'll see real numbers here when we're done. Luckily, I have some family with a shop, but you can do this in your driveway. Just have a jack, some jack stands, and jack the Jeep up, get it on the stands, and use the actual jack to lift and lower your axles. Get the springs in and out, you're good. That being said, we're gonna start on the front. All right, with the weight still on the axle, wheel still on, you're gonna wanna take this 21mm bolt out of your track bar. All right, first step, you're gonna have to take your wheels off. So 19mm. Don't forget your key in case you got a lock on these things. Yeah. Next up, get your 18mm socket and wrench. We're gonna remove this lower shock bolt. To allow the axle to droop without pulling out your ABS or brake lines, you got to remove this 10mm bolt right here. Make sure that hangs loose and isn't caught up in the perch here. Okay, so now we're going to remove the sway bar end links, and to do that, on the top you're going to get yourself a 19mm wrench, and then grab an 18mm socket. We'll get that removed.
And on the bottom we got an 18 and an 18. Just getting that started with a breaker bar. Again, do that on both sides. So you've removed both sway bar end links, and your new Teraflex kit will come with these for the front. You aren't going to need to reuse them, but you will need the hardware. So before you throw anything away, keep these two. You're going to need them for the new kit. Okay, so before you drop your axle, you're going to want to make sure that none of the wiring associated with this axle is going to get hung up. So on the driver's side frame rail, there's that little piece of plastic there holding the wiring. You're going to want to disconnect that, and then we can drop the axle. Okay, so just in front of the just behind the diff housing, you're going to see this additional wiring clip. So remove that as well before dropping the axle. It'll help with the slack of these wires. All right, now that everything is pretty much disconnected, we can start dropping the axle. And in this case, we're gonna just lift the Jeep, and the axle is gonna stay on the stands. All right, when you're dropping the axle, go slow, because you never know, you might have forgotten something. And in this case, forgot the breather line, the axle here. So just, I just pulled it off, but you can use a screwdriver and continue dropping the thing. All right, once your axle's low enough, you can twist your spring, pull it up, and out. All right, with the spring removed, you can reach up into the perch and pull down the factory isolator. We're gonna need to reuse that. And at this point, you can grab your spacers. So again, Teraflex gives you the option. So you can either put 2 in or 1. If you put 2 in, you're getting rid of the rake the Jeep usually comes with. And I've got a bunch of stuff on the front of my Jeep, like a winch. So there's that added weight. So there's even more rake. So I'm gonna use both. You do what you want. We're gonna try 2 here. And those just slide up in. Once you get those in, put your isolator from the factory. And that'll hold it all together before putting the spring back in. Okay, so we got both we got both spacers in. Time to put the spring back in, and it's the short coil, the narrow coil up at the top. You're probably gonna have to wrestle this thing.
Watch your fingers. There you go. Kick it in.
Okay, once it's in, you're gonna have to rotate this thing just a bit because there's actually a little bit of a groove there. Okay, so we got the coil back in, which is great. You might need, you can use a spring compressor if you really want to, but once you get it in place, you gotta rotate it, and it actually sits in a specific location here down on the perch, okay? So just watch that sit in that groove there, and that's what you wanna see. Okay, so Teraflex gives us these new links, but they need to be slightly assembled. You got this metal sleeve. It's got to be pressed in to the end of the link, and you can use pliers. I'm using this vise. So quickly, I'm just going to use some lithium grease, and I'm just going to spray it on the inside. That should just help it seat. And then I'm just going to crank it down. There you go. That's all it takes. It's pretty simple. Once we get this installed on the Jeep, we'll do the Zerk fitting. But for now, just get the sleeve set into both of these end links. Okay, so grab your new end links. Get on the sway bar. These new ones take a washer, so drop that on. Get your nut. Get that on there, and it's a 19 millimeter. I'm just gonna torque that down. Okay, so now we're gonna put the bottom bolt in, and both top and bottom are gonna get torqued down to 75 foot-pounds. So make sure you do that. So that's gonna be an 18mm wrench and socket. Okay, so we have the end links on, and what we gotta do is we gotta add the Zerk fittings. So these are going on the bottom. We got some threads there, so you can start them by hand. Then once you get it going, you can grab a 3/8 wrench and just snug them down. And add some grease to them. And you're gonna want to grease them, you know, every time you go off road, or, you know, just every so often. When you do a maintenance check, an oil change, just give them a little pump. Okay, so before attaching your shock, you're gonna want to lower or lift your Jeep until your harness here lines up with the bracket under the perch, and you're gonna bolt that in with a 10mm. Once you get that done, you can go ahead and reattach your breather hose and all the wire connections that were attached to the frame rail. So you can go ahead and do that now. Okay, so to get your shock bolt in, if you're doing this in the driveway, you're gonna wanna jack up the axle so that way the mount matches up with your shock. In my case, I'm gonna lower the Jeep on the lift. Whoops. This is going to take an 18mm socket.
I'm the same way. When I switched from this new one I had on board the other day, it's like balance, right?
Alright, with the Jeep on the ground,
It's ready to go.
we just got to get the rear track bar out. So it's a 21mm socket. Alright, so on the rear, we got to disconnect our shocks. And we're going to need a 18mm wrench and socket. And right now I have the axle under tension. Do that on both sides. Alright, so upper sway bar, we're going to take this right out, and you're going to need a 19mm wrench, an 18mm socket. You can fully disconnect this. Okay, so on the bottom sway bar, you're going to need an 18mm wrench and an 18mm socket. And for this one, you don't have to fully remove the whole thing, just loosen it up. Okay, before you can droop the axles down, you got to disconnect a few things, including your brake line. There's this bracket right here, so you got to take your 10mm socket and just disconnect these guys on both sides. Alright, go around, look for any wire loom, because you're going to need to disconnect that from the frame. So just get in there and pry them out. Just look at your diff. In the rear, there is a wire harness connection. You're going to want to disconnect that one as well. Alright, and don't forget to disconnect your breather hose on the axle tube. Using a 10mm deep well socket, you want to disconnect your parking brake line, and it's got two bolts right up here.
Yeah, on the phone, he looks at me, he was just grabbing we're all hungover, right? He's trying to, plus funny, it was minus.
Now that everything is disconnected, we're going to start to raise the Jeep up. And if you're doing this in the driveway, you're most likely going to be using a jack. you're gonna want to drop your axle using that. So do it slowly, make sure that everything is disconnected and nothing's getting hung up. And the back is pretty easy because it pretty much disassembles itself. Here comes the spring. Oh, and here's the spring isolator. Came out pretty easy. Okay, so take your Teraflex rear spacer, looks like this, and you can take your factory isolator, and it's gonna press on through that and just fit in like that. It's pretty simple. And the top piece here, it's gonna use some lubrication, and that's gonna press into the frame rail. So we're gonna do that next. We're getting lubing over here.
A little bit left, we got another 40 there. We're in the 40 creek. Look at last one.
There you go. Use some of that. Just work it in there.
This one? Yeah.
Number 2. There you go. Work it in there.
The X-rated version of.
Should I censor this? Alright, so we got our spacer all lubed up. It's primed for the hole. And you could use a block of wood against the spring perch and, you know, jack up the axle till it presses it in. But we've got a bottle jack, so we're just going to use that against the perch and just situate it into the hole. Just going to hold this and we're going to start jacking the axle. It should just pop in once it gets enough pressure. When it feels right, it'll pop. That's it. She's in. She's happy. She's home. So we're getting the spring back in. You're gonna get the tighter coil on the bottom. The one that looks a little more open goes to the top. And just work her in there. Okay, so now we can, in this case, drop the Jeep to compress the spring. And then once we do that, we can start reconnecting our breather tube, the brake, the parking brake hookup on the body, and then any kind of ABS sensor or wire loom. Those will all go back together, and then we're going to bolt back up the shock and the sway bar. Let me just move the shock.
Yeah, line them up.
That one's good. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so wiring. Let's get all those back home. Just put them where they belong.
Take that for Jack's old car cat. There's a lot more grunt to get it on.
So now you can drop the axle or lift it up. And we're gonna install our bolts for the shocks. If you're having trouble lining it up, just a pry bar or something. I'll get it started up. Get her in there. And then bolt this up and torque it down to 56 foot-pounds. Do it on both sides. This is gonna take an 18mm socket and wrench. I wasn't filming the first time, as usual. All right, after installing the shock, getting that torqued down, you want to get your sway bar, your end link installed. Then that's going to take an 18mm socket, and you're going to want to use a 19mm wrench here. And this is getting torqued down to 75 foot-pounds.
Well, this is your family.
All right, make sure to torque down the bottom end link to 75 foot-pounds, and you're going to need an 18mm socket and wrench. So next up, we're gonna reconnect our brake line, 10mm socket, and we're tightening this down to 16 foot-pounds. Like, it's just a tire coming through. A couple final steps here before we can finally drop the Jeep and torque down the track bars. We have to get our wheels on, so go ahead and do that.
Yeah. You got it all on my face. Oh, the camera?
Yeah. And if you notice the wheel spacers, that's going to be another video. So, you know, subscribe to my channel, because then you can see that video too.
Two thumbs up.
All right.
You got it, man.
Wheels are on.
Woohoo!
Now we can finally lower the Jeep. She goes down.
Back up, you say, right?
Okay, so front track bar, once the Jeep is on the ground, you're gonna get your bolt in there. It's in the instructions, it says if you have trouble, have someone move the steering wheel. It should line up the hole. Once that's good to go, we gotta torque it down to 125 foot-pounds. So get under there and give her. That's the front. We're gonna do pretty much the same thing on the back. Let's go take a look at that. Okay, so the rear track bar, same deal. You're gonna wanna get it lined up. And if the hole isn't matching up, get your fattest friend or whoever you got around, push on the side of the Jeep. Oh, he's pushing a little too hard. A little less, a little less. Until you get it right in there. And then don't forget your capture nut on the back. And then you're gonna torque this down to 125. Again, just like the front, doing it the same here. It's live, I think. Broadcasting.
125?
Yep.
Oh my, just give it a little tight. Push! Pretend you're having a baby. Just push.
Dropping the wrench
Push.
into my skull.
That ain't clicking. That ain't clicking. I don't hear no click yet. No click.
I'm too skinny.
You want me to click this? You want me to click that for you?
Maybe I should pull up.
Push.
Hold on.
Stands in here. This is not off, y'all.
Oh yeah, it is.
No? There. Oh, I heard it clicking. Yeah.
Double clicky. Are we done? All right. I don't remember what the initial height was, but because I have the footage to tell you guys when I do this, so let's. We're at 42 at the top of the fender flare. It's on the front. And the rear, let's see what we got. Our new number is 42 and about a quarter. So I'll do the difference there and I'll tell you, how much we gained on the front, how much in the back, give you some spec. And again, I used the two spacers of the front and obviously the one in the back, so that lifts it up plus gets rid of the rake. So that's how she looks now. Alright, so that's how the install went. And to be honest, it went a lot smoother than I expected. I did have the lift, which is a huge benefit, but this is a job that you can definitely do in the driveway.
just make sure you have a couple good jack stands. You're going to want to jack your Jeep up, get them on those stands, and then you can use the jack to lift and lower the axles, you know, as you go about the install. The ride quality is much better, you know, and it's mainly because we're getting rid of that front end dive. When turning, it's not doing like that body roll thing anymore. It's a lot more stable, and I really like that. I really wish it came from the factory like this, because it's a better ride for sure. So this Teraflex leveling kit leveled out the Jeep. There's a slight performance improvement here. The Jeep looks better, you know, with its level stance, but there's this one unexpected benefit that I just noticed, and it's when going for longer drives in the Jeep. Because the Jeep is not pointing downward when it's level, the seat bottom cushion is also a lot more level, and in turn, my legs are a lot more comfortable when driving. You know, when I'm doing like those long distance drives, my legs aren't getting that weird stiff feeling in the knee. So this is like totally unexpected, but I love it. It actually made a difference. If you're looking to get a larger set of tires and you know, you either have a budget constraint or a time constraint, you just need to get it done, this is a good way of doing it. You're not going to break the bank, and you know, you can always do an upgrade in the future, and that's what I intend on doing. So if you're looking to level out your Jeep, this is a good option for you. I'm going to leave a link in the description so you can, you know, take a look at this thing for yourself. Pull over here. Thanks again for checking out this install video. If you haven't already, please subscribe, because I'm going to be doing way more of these things. I've already got a bunch on my channel, so go check those out. My dog and I, we're about to go and hit the trails. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.